The young boy disappears the next time the procession takes place. He has been gone for a very long time, not just for a single day. Where he went, no one tells you. The palace's large, weighty gates remain closed. The entire planet lets forth a gasp. Prince Louis appeared to disappear into thin air. No more laughing reverberating through palace halls, no more joyous waving from the royal balcony, and no more camera peeks of the youngest monarch. There was stillness for weeks, until the palace finally spoke today. There was stillness for weeks, until the palace finally spoke today. The Prince Louis disappearance. People in Britain had been staring at a little, unnerving missing for weeks. Prince Louis, who used to be the life of any royal event, has ceased to make public appearances. Initially, it appeared to be a small mistake, a sick child, or someone purposefully avoiding the relentless scrutiny of the media. However, as the events unfolded, it became hard to overlook the young prince's vacant position. The audience, accustomed to seeing each member of the family in perfect alignment and posture, began to notice what was missing. Royal battles went on with their customary accuracy. Standing rigidly behind his father was Prince George. Princess Charlotte smiled calmly and confidently, but Louis's chair was still empty, a silent gap in a universe that had been meticulously planned. Social media was buzzing, journalists were scrawling, and photographers were clicking, but there was no official explanation. The palace remained silent, which only led to more conjecture. During significant occurrences, the absence became increasingly noticeable. Only 4 of the 5 anticipated family members showed up for the recent Commonwealth Day service, which was followed by the color-changing ceremony and a somber Remembrance Sunday. Prince Louis was absent once more. Every silence was filled with unresolved questions, and every omission seems purposeful. Curiosity and alarm grew throughout the country. Murmurs replaced the whispers. Creates a sense of public unease. Speculating about the causes, observers started to piece together a story from the shards of appearances. Was it a medical issue? A personal family choice? Perhaps something more delicate? The palace was desperate to keep it a secret. It was impossible to overlook the noticeable disparity of a well-liked youngster in a monarchy known for its manipulation of reputation and image. The public perceived it more as a form of concealment, a puzzle with pieces purposefully left out, than as protection. The strain was felt even by those outside royal circles. The meticulously preserved image of stability was shaken by the lack of a single child, a prince. The public was enthralled with the mystery and conjecture surrounding Prince Louis's absence, which went beyond a simple family issue. Every camera flash that missed him, every ceremonial shot that lacked his happy presence, contributed to an expanding, unsolved mystery. Why had the young prince disappeared silently from the world stage? The quiet around Prince Louis became louder than any announcement amid the staged grins and well-groomed looks. It was a silent enigma, one that placed the royal household under unprecedented scrutiny, the public in suspense, and the press clamoring for answers, at first written off as unimportant. The young prince's disappearance had become a sign of something far more fascinating, and the country waited anxiously for the truth to come to light. Claiming routine and solitude, the palace abruptly and discreetly announced the young prince's exit. What actually took place behind those closed doors, though? What secrets did the headlines attempt to conceal? Let's investigate. The crown's hidden silence. Then the unexpected moment arrived. The world's televisions were ablaze with headlines, but the castle itself was hauntingly silent. There was a statement, succinct, measured, and well-written. It discussed choices made with the welfare of the young prince in mind, of a period out of the public eye. It was ordinary on the surface. However, those who spoke the language of the palace knew better. There was a clear urgency beneath the formal words, an undetectable alarm. The issue was not privacy. There had been a terrible, irreparable error. The royal family rarely speaks without cause, as history has shown. Often, silence conceals much more than it discloses. Seldom does a child's disappearance from public view signify a straightforward departure from custom. It indicates a disruption that is too significant to be publicly reported. And in this instance, the delicate wording alluded to an issue that was well beyond the realm of normalcy, a disruption that even the palace was unable to mask with polite words and smiles. It is necessary to re-examine the subtle indicators that were previously disregarded in order to fully appreciate the significance of this absence. Videos from well-known incidents now have a somber meaning. Prince Louis, typically a flurry of charm and enthusiasm, looked strangely still on the balcony, in front of screaming throng, his hands clasped, his face blank, his eyes searching the distance instead of interacting with the audience. It was not simple shyness or awkwardness in childhood. Shot after shot captured the silent, unsaid request, beneath the pomp of royal history, an appeal that had been ignored at the time. He stood there while the family surrounding him waved, grinned, and performed for the world. Tension-filled island in the performance. His subdued presence stood in sharp contrast to his relatives' practiced excitement. Each gesture, or lack thereof, suggested a larger narrative that the palace was unable to publicly reveal. What had formerly appeared insignificant or transient now loomed big. Something much more significant was the cause of this absence. Few people dared to contemplate what the announcement, when it finally came, confirmed. The young prince's everlasting exclusion from public life was the result of unfathomable circumstances rather than whims. What had previously been written off as fleeting silence now exposed a more profound reality. Every unspoken gesture, every avoided look, and every skillfully orchestrated exchange created a terrifying image, because the truth it held was too important, too fragile, and too deadly for the world to witness. The palace remained silent, not because it had nothing to say. The world was left wondering what had really transpired behind those gleaming doors, as a child's silent struggle in the heart of the monarchy had become a secret too heavy to reveal. Most people were unaware of Prince Louis's modest troubles, despite the palace's magnificence. What precisely did the child behavior specialist see, though? And would these early indicators point to a more complex tale of royal life? Royal grins conceal deep tensions. There are times that the cameras miss, even in the midst of the royal ground's magnificence, moments that are more powerful than the cheers. When a famous child behavior expert watched film of the royal family one day, her findings quietly shocked many, who would typically just perceive the well-polished picture. The youngest, Prince Louis, exhibited actions that were everything from lighthearted. At every cheer, his shoulders stiffened and his eyes frequently flitted away, and slight fidgets revealed a stress within. To the untrained eye, what appeared to be restlessness was actually a hidden battle to deal with societal pressure. Even a toddler could sense the weight of expectations as he leaned back from the crowd and retreated into himself. Catherine, poised and calm, harbored a secret concern of her own. Her smile, which was perfect in public photos, briefly broke in the live video. She didn't look at her son with pride. Anxiety was a brief warning that something might not be right. Mothers instinctively check on their children, but in this case, the expression was a delicate blend of vigilance and anxiety. Less than a heartbeat passed. However, it was a clear indication that a parent's watchfulness never goes to sleep, even at happy occasions. Constantly on guard, Prince William showed authority in subtle, nearly imperceptible ways. He once looked around the audience before giving a single nod to one of his senior aides, which caused the figure to go back into the darkness. When examined later, it suggested a subtle orchestration, a deliberate shielding of his son from forces the public could never witness. At the time, nothing seemed unusual. William has reportedly taken strong action to protect his kids in the past, and this seemingly insignificant gesture suggests a similar goal, an underlying strategy to protect Louis's experiences, even if it meant subtly limiting relationships. In the meantime, A more complete picture is painted by what the media failed to report. The strain behind the grins, the unseen lines of worry interwoven with movements and quick looks. These minor indications of stress stand in stark contrast to the cheers and applause, which are intended to celebrate, demonstrating the careful balance the family strikes between obligation and love. Far from the vast gaze of the lens, moments of ecstasy coexist uneasily with subtle stress, creating a quiet drama that plays out in deliberate actions and micro-expressions. Ultimately, these brief cues, William's quiet orders, Catherine's nervous check, and Lewis's quiet retreat, tell a tale that the general public hardly ever hears. Even the most royal exteriors cannot completely conceal the human heart. Underneath the grandeur, there is alertness, concern, and a never-ending attempt to shield a family from unrelenting observation. The final balcony appearance appeared straightforward, but every look and pause suggested something more. But why was silence preferred over headlines? And what was actually happening behind the stage smiles? The silent balcony. Cameras clicked on that clear morning, yet something felt strangely constrained. Later, photographers admitted in whispers that it had been unique. No lengthy pictures, no solo portraits, no close-ups of Prince Louis. A few hours prior to the event, one recalls receiving an unexpected embargo notification, which at the time seemed nearly pointless due to its ambiguity. In retrospect, however, it was the initial hint of a meticulously constructed tale. One spoke quietly rather than in the news. The last appearance on the balcony wasn't just a formality. With calculated stillness, pauses, and glances, it was a graceful departure. The moment appeared to be just another royal greeting to the general public, but it was a fleeting glimpse into a personal reality. While cameras flashed and applause erupted, a storm was subtly brewing inside the palace, invisible but unavoidable. Every move and breath had weight behind those shiny walls. Once the calm fulcrum of the monarchy, Catherine had devolved into a silent protector. Her son was her main concern, the demands of protocol, the crown's unrelenting stare, the unrealistic demands. They all vowed to devour him. She begged for a reprieve in her heart. Allow him to hide behind gates so that regulations can be loosened, where a child could just be, where whispers were secure. Her concern was expressed in handwritten, unedited, private letters. They expressed the concerns that no public declaration could adequately express and were addressed to King Charles and high-ranking authorities. She didn't look for attention, compassion, or praise. She pleaded for kindness and tolerance, for even the tiniest actions that could shield her son from the machinery of expectation that was tearing away at his youth. She talked about the times that were impossible for cameras to record. Abrupt, unexplained weeping. A mumble of nervousness replaced the laughter. When everything appeared too much to handle, withdraw into isolated areas. He was gradually losing himself in the unrelenting beat of the palace. She mentioned his sensitivity, flinching at a camera's shutter, hiding from the employees who were supposed to mentor him, and withdrawing from royal tutors. These were cries for assistance, not rebellion or mischief. Nevertheless, the scene appeared flawless, well-groomed, and comforting to the general public. Unaware of the silent struggles taking place within, the outside world only saw the joyful waves and radiant grins. The balcony was more than just tradition for those who paid close attention. A brief moment of vulnerability concealed beneath regality. It was a coded message. Catherine held her breath for every precious second as the audience applauded without understanding what was actually happening. With all its authority and regulations, the palace was ruthless. However, a mother's love, expressed through letters and covert glances, aimed to create a safe haven for her child, an imperceptible defense against the burden of anticipation, a silent appeal for forgiveness in a perfection-driven culture. The ceremony's external image was captured by the cameras. Beneath that exterior, however, was a tale of silent struggle, commitment, and urgent protection. A story that persisted even though it would never make the news. In between royal hallways, shutter clicks, and the quiet, unheard groans of a mother defending her son, the Princess of Wales, Catherine, supported Prince Louis through his private hardships while maintaining a composed public persona. But how did palace expectations exacerbate the problem, and what personal struggles and pressures influenced her response? A mother, in front of the throne. Everything changed when the palace calendar insisted on seeing another flawless grin. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was engaged in a conflict that no briefing paper could resolve behind the gleaming doors and well-timed appearances. She was supposed to exude poise, wave from balconies, and glide through ceremonies. However, Prince Louis of Wales, her youngest son, was having difficulties at home that were not visible to the cameras. Whispers had started throughout the royal halls by early 2026. Advisors discussed stability and optics in cautious tones. Alongside Prince William, Prince of Wales, they reminded her that she was not just a mother, but also the future queen consort. They cautioned that every choice had political implications. From Kensington Palace to Windsor, even the slightest absence might make headlines in London and beyond. However, the reality in her son's room seemed far away from the chats. On certain mornings, Louis refused to leave his room. There was silence in response to invitations to family pictures, rehearsals, and a ceremonial reveal on February 19th. Gentle prodding didn't accomplish anything. Assurances were unsuccessful. For Catherine, what the palace authorities referred to as a phase felt more profound and pressing. The organization has its own cadence. She has hardly broken up her marriage since it began in 2011. Without protest, she went to neighborhood visits, state receptions, and charity galas. Her poise was recognized by the personnel. But as the weeks passed, that serene facade started to crumble. Meetings became heated. Later, an advisor acknowledged that the princess, who had previously listened attentively, suddenly questioned any proposal that put duty ahead of her child's welfare. An early March planning session turned out to be pivotal, when a high-ranking official casually proposed handling the Prince Louis problem. Stricter scheduling caused Catherine to get up and leave her seat. The ensuing stillness weighed more than any disagreement. Key advisors received a note on their desks the following morning. It was no longer a courteous request for leniency. It was unmistakable, straightforward, and firm. She would reevaluate her public pledges until her son felt safe. Days later, the true shock arrived. Due to a significant palace obligation, Louis declined to accompany his siblings for a last-minute visit. Compromise was encouraged by staff. In order to maintain the image, they suggested a restricted photo opportunity and a shorter appearance. Catherine declined. She turned down an event highlighted in bold on the official calendar for the first time since joining the royal family. Inside the palace, the response was instantaneous. Some were afraid of rumors. Others were concerned about precedent. After all, constancy is essential to the monarchy's success. But outside the palace gates, another discussion erupted. Many observed a mother setting boundaries rather than rebellion. Catherine's suffering was very intimate and private. She was aware of the centuries-old tradition and symbolism of her role. Titles, however, were insignificant in comparison to seeing her child in pain. The conflict between motherhood and the throne grew nearly intolerable. The organization was difficult to convince. Advisors persisted in advocating for a peaceful conclusion. It was a straightforward warning. Exposure to the public on a regular basis may be emotionally taxing. That was unquestionable for a father. It was a direct conflict with centuries of expectations for an heir to the throne. William had long maintained a cautious balance between his family and his responsibilities. However, insiders claim that he lost equilibrium as soon as he realized his son could have to cover the expense. At first, the pivotal encounter did not develop into a dramatic event. It started off as just another strategy meeting, talks about public participation, appearances, and the future of the monarchy in a rapidly evolving Britain. According to reports, Queen Camilla was standing next to King Charles III as he listened from the middle of the chamber. The mood changed as William walked in with a thin folder full of letters and papers. It contained testimony and a documented evaluation from a doctor, not rumors. It was Catherine's description of her anxieties in writing. When rumors circulated that the young prince's greater prominence may improve public relations with the crown, the conversation became heated. It was a tactic to some. It felt like sacrifice to William. Later, witnesses would recount a unique occasion. The future monarch is positioned as a father rather than an heir. His composure wavered. He questioned the notion that a child's welfare should be subordinated to tradition. He wondered if Camilla's circle members and other advisors were prioritizing appearances over security. It was thought that the remarks said behind those closed doors could rip through decades of royal discipline. Charles tried to calm things down by reminding everyone that unity was essential to the monarchy's existence. However, William maintained that his family's serenity could not be sacrificed for unity. With finality, the folder was closed. There was no mistaking the message. Public appearances proceeded according to plan in the days that followed. Grins came back. The headline became softer. However, a fundamental change had occurred. Tradition versus modern image was no longer the point of contention. It has turned into a legacy issue. What sort of monarchy would survive? How much did it cost you personally? The storm was still going strong behind the palace gates. It has just started to reshape the future. In a heated confrontation at Buckingham Palace, Prince William decided to shield his son rather than please the media. But what underlying anxieties or demands drove him to take such a risk? The decision that altered everything. It wasn't merely deceptive. It was risky. Senior advisors had convened in a secret chamber within Buckingham Palace to resolve what they perceived to be a straightforward issue of public scheduling, and the words lingered in the air. Rather, it became an unexpected encounter. The reaction was prompt when a royal advisor warned that postponing appearances would result in a detrimental press hush. Let them conjecture after that. The room was taken aback by the composed yet forceful response. With a firm expression, Prince William turned to face the advisor. "I'd rather they hunt down shadows than ruin my son." Even King Charles III appeared surprised. He had witnessed his son deal with stress in the past, but not in this manner. William's voice was one of resolve, not fury. It was a challenge to the unwritten rule of endurance, which is to smile through agony for the sake of duty. The ultimatum followed. William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, would be willing to completely withdraw from royal life if the palace declined to change its mind, and if Prince Louis was still on the list for upcoming public appearances. Few people in the chamber were aware that the actual storm had started weeks earlier, far away from the palace hallways. A report never intended for public consumption was kept in a locked file within a private clinic in London. Before arriving at a royal medical liaison, the material had made its way covertly amongst physicians. Not a single headline, no formalities. Only a sealed envelope containing the answers Catherine had silently sought. The worries had begun quietly. Louis's behavior changed at home in ways that disturbed his parents. Abrupt withdrawal followed bursts of dazzling energy. There were times when he seemed aloof, and times when he had angry outbursts over trivial annoyances. From others, he loved as well. Routines become erratic. Catherine was determined to comprehend, consented to a private assessment. She wanted lucidity, not hearsay. They reframed everything when the results came in. What some could write off as moodiness in childhood needed careful attention and safeguarding. On the other hand, tradition and visibility power the palace apparatus. Appearances are symbols, not merely occasions. Furthermore, symbols are rarely immune to criticism. William had a different perspective. He had been constantly observed as he grew up, seeing every facial emotion become a narrative. He refused to give his youngest child the same burden. It was not dramatic theater to threaten to resign from royal duties. The line was created to protect family. The ensuing discussion was heated but decisive. Preserving a calendar was not as important as protecting a child. The plans changed. The engagements were updated. The advisor feared that the quiet was no longer unintentional, but deliberate. Only few changes were visible to the public outside the royal walls. Less outings. A more subdued time for the young prince. They missed a father who redefined responsibility as unflinching protection rather than relentless exposure. Ultimately, the monarchy had to face a reality that went beyond news stories. Family comes first, but tradition is important. And sometimes the most courageous thing to do is to prioritize privacy over performance. A shocking medical study that revealed a severe neurological risk exacerbated by living as a queen had just reached Catherine. However, how did her early life experiences either make her more resilient or more vulnerable? The day. The spotlight went down. Nobody in the palace anticipated that the medical report would be delivered with such silent impact. The words that stared back at her from the last page were not what Catherine had anticipated. She had prepared herself for worry, maybe even caution. The experts had discovered indications of an uncommon neurological weakness. They claimed it was manageable, but dangerously sensitive to long-term stress, endless ceremonies, flashing cameras, and crowds. It was being exacerbated by the very foundations of royal existence. A warning from one doctor pierced the room. Prolonged exposure may cause long-term psychological damage. The full impact of that finding had already been felt behind closed doors by the time the well-polished words were made public. Decisions that would never fully surface in official briefings were being taken at locations such as Kensington Palace and beyond. A mother and father were facing a fear that no title could allay beneath the uniforms, customs, and centuries of expectation. Following the events in the spring of 2024, the shift became evident. Suddenly, tiny Prince Louis was becoming less and less visible. No balcony wave ever spoke as loudly as his absence did. It appeared to the outside world to be just private family time. But the atmosphere inside the royal household was different. Vulnerability, not scandal or rebellion, had been revealed. Being a royal has always required poise. Perfection is demanded, particularly from the youngest members, from the solemn appearances in front of international cameras to the elaborate ceremonies held at Buckingham Palace. For a youngster, however, perfection is a burdensome costume. That was painfully evident in the report. It would be necessary to modify long-standing customs, cut back on appearances, and subtly rewrite expectations that had previously seemed unbreakable in order to protect him. The quiet was soon filled by rumors. There were rumors of secret conflicts and private disputes within the organization, as if fate itself had stepped in. Some even referred to old tales and prophecies made decades before. But there was something more straightforward for those who really comprehended the occasion. A family that prioritizes health over show. The monarchy becomes less of an institution and more of a home when the palace gates close every evening, and tough decisions sound far louder in that house than cheers. The crown itself appeared to sag just a little on the day Prince Louis left the unrelenting glare, recognizing that even the most steadfast traditions occasionally have to give way in order to defend the smallest voice, is not a sign of weakness. It's unclear if this retreat signifies a temporary halt or the start of a more significant change. The public may only gradually realize how the quiet surrounding a single child has altered the cadence of royal existence. What, in your opinion, ultimately compelled the palace to handle Prince Louis's abrupt disappearance? And can there be a startling claim concealing a more profound reality? We want to know what you think. Remember to subscribe